Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Druva is back with series 2 of In Cloud We Trust. We're excited to be back. We're excited to have you with us. I'm Lisa Martin, and today's topic is the year ahead in data protection. And who else would we want to talk to but W. Curtis Preston, Druva's Chief Technologist, and CTO Stephen Manley. Guys, good morning. It's great to see you.
Good to see you, Lisa.
So the year ahead in data protection, I do have a magic 8-ball in case we need to consult this. So just so you know, I got it here because I thought it was, 2020 was So we've got the magic 8-ball. But what we're going to talk about, and as always, as we did in series 1, we encourage you to ask questions, participate, try to stump our guys here. They know a lot of stuff. We're going to be talking about 3 things: data protection trends, the growing challenge of SaaS apps and growth of data. And then we like to leave you with recommendations. But today our third topic is going to be overrated trends. All right, Curtis, we're going to start off with you. Data protection trends. What are some of the things that you're seeing in your magic 8-ball?
Well, I think what we're seeing a lot, what we saw in 2020, besides obviously the coronavirus, was the continued ramp up of ransomware attacks. And I think that both sort of traditional ransomware, where they're doing they're encrypting your data and letting you have it back, or what I call theftware. Some also call it extortionware, where they steal your data and then tell you that they're going to release it to the public or something like that if you don't give them money. But I think one of the reasons, if not the reason, for the significant increase in ransomware attacks is this idea of ransomware as a service. We're fans of the concept of as a service. Obviously, that's how we do business. We see the trend in IT going that way. But sadly, it's also happened in the ransomware world. You needed to have some kind of know-how to attack a company before, but now you just need to know where to go to contact a ransomware as a service company. So what I think is going to happen is a continued ramping up of the intensity and frequency of ransomware attacks because of this.
So more ransomware attacks. We talked a lot about that last year and saw a lot of new vectors, databases, for example, and other things too, like school districts and governments and things like that. Stephen, what are some of the trends that you're seeing from your seat at the CTO table?
I think the ransomware as a service is the reason you saw so many hits against school districts and hospitals and small government agencies. And this year we'll see it even more in sort of mid-sized businesses, is because it's become so affordable to make a ransomware attack. The cloud means I don't need to buy a bunch of hardware. I don't need a big lab. And like Curtis said, as a service means I don't even need to hire smart people. I can just make this happen. And so it makes it a lot more, frankly, cost efficient to target even the mid-sized companies that don't necessarily have to pay as much in the ransom. So if you're out there and you haven't been hit and you think this is something that happens to big organizations, be really careful this year. You're actually the target. You're the weak link that they're going for. Now, the other thing that kind of ties into the ransomware, I think, is that the other reason ransomware has such a good hit rate is we've got so many more workloads running in so many more places, right? Whether you're talking about SaaS applications, Microsoft 365, Salesforce, or you've got some things starting to run in the cloud, or you've got some remote sites, or you've got people working remotely. The vectors are so much bigger. Things have spread so much that it's just a lot easier to find a weak point than it used to be when everything was just in a data center. And I think that's just going to accelerate this year. Right? People spent so much of last year sort of on hold thinking, well, once we get past coronavirus, once we get the vaccine, once we X, Y, or Z, you can't keep your business on hold forever. And so we're going to see a lot of people saying the only way I'm going to be able to get going is in the cloud. And they're going to start spinning up applications in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. And so a lot more breadth, a lot more diversity in the application space this year.
I've been associated with backup since my hair was Steven's color. And backup was never a thing that people aspired to do. No one wanted to be the backup person. And that was true back then. That's true now. And so the fact that backup is still a collateral duty, it means that it's not getting the attention that it deserves in a lot of different places. And as a result, I think Stephen's right that basically backup was always a challenge. Now it's even more of a challenge because of the disparity of all the different types of workloads.
But it's critical as well, Stephen. So you guys, ransomware as a service, Curtis, you talked about, Stephen, you talked about app sprawl. What about, with such acceleration of so many things last year, Stephen, are there companies that really need to get back to the basics of data protection?
The dedicated backup teams, the dedicated backup engineer, we're seeing fewer and fewer of them, right? As IT heads towards generalists or versatilists or whatever term you want to use for it, protection is becoming part of a larger job. And so what we find is a lot of companies saying, well, I want to go do exciting thing XYZ. I've heard this really cool thing. I'm going to do, I want to do the high-end copy data management, or I'm going to do something really fancy. And what you find is, when things go wrong, if you get hit with ransomware, I made a snapshot that I indexed that I then, sometimes it's best just to say, I've got a copy. And Curtis loves this, right? The 3-2-1 rule. I've got enough copies of the data, and I've got them on enough types of storage, and I've got them in offsite locations so that I can be robustly protected against whatever happens. And that's true no matter what your application is, whether it's Exchange Online, or it's a VM in your data center, or it's an EC2 instance running in AWS, whatever it is. The very first most important job of a data protection administrator is to say, when something goes wrong, user error, attack, system failure, application error, you are able to recover the data. All the fancy stuff after that, interesting to talk about, but get your ducks in a row first, or you're going to find yourself very much exposed.
Right.
Stephen, I'm glad you brought up the 3-2-1 rule. Of course, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, because I think, and it is, there is no more basic rule than, I call it the E equals MC squared of backup, right? That, 3 copies, 3 versions of your data on 2 different media, one of which is somewhere else, because there are so many things today that are done that are called backup or called data protection or called DR that don't follow that most basic rule of backup, right? And so, yes, I agree with getting back to basics. And I'll just give as one example, the proliferation of SaaS apps out there, and the huge use of things like Microsoft 365, G Suite, Salesforce, that customers are assuming that backup is part of that. And number one, it's not. Number two, even if it was included, which it's not, it would be inside their system, which means it would violate the 3-2-1 rule, right? You need a copy somewhere else. But again, there isn't even a copy to talk about. So I don't even know why we continue to have this conversation.
It's interesting to me because, 20 years ago, we had that debate, are snapshots backups or snapshots not backups? Right. And I think for the most part, that's been resolved, though then it flares up on Twitter once a year just for the fun of it. I am fascinated and slightly horrified that things like, well, my recycle bin is my backup. And you just look at it and say, that's even worse than thinking a snapshot was a backup. It's a recycle bin. You know what that is? It's a recycle bin. It is not a backup in any way, shape, or form. And again, a lot of times this is by people who don't have a backup background, and organizations don't necessarily have as many backup people as they used to. But it's really important. And I think a career opportunity for backup people, as you see your data center perhaps migrating to the cloud and migrating to SaaS apps, being that person that says, we've got to make sure all this is safe, and taking that leadership role is a way to remain relevant in today's IT, because the problems and the challenges and the rules don't go away, even if the applications are and the hardware is.
Make it a career opportunity before it's a career limiting move. Sorry, Lisa.
There you go. No, sticking with CTO for a second, we talked, Curtis, you mentioned this too. We talked a lot last year about Salesforce and their end of their data recovery service. I've talked with Druva customers who were dependent on what is it now, Google Workspace recycle bin, which changed their policies. We talked a lot about a lot of customers not knowing that, we're responsible for protecting the data. Have you guys seen, like in the last 6 months or so, as we've seen SaaS growth, have you seen customers really understanding and grappling with, we have to protect the data? That is not what Microsoft or Salesforce is doing. Stephen, starting with you.
Yes, more so. It certainly, compared to a year ago when the discussion was, seriously, you need to back this up, and here's all the things you need to worry about. I'm having fewer of those discussions. But I still get a lot of discussions, I think, where the backup teams will ask us to come in, Druva as an external entity, and basically say, can you sit down with our 365 team and walk them through? Because when I tell them, they just assume I'm trying to protect my job, or I'm being, sort of Chicken Little in the sky is falling. You as an external company, you can come help and explain it to that team and start to build up some credibility. And so I think especially the backup teams are realizing this needs to happen. But I think they're still struggling in convincing the rest of their business that this is important. And that's, again, an area where we're happy to help, but it's certainly an area that I'd like to see in the next year that becomes more widespread and more understood through the industry.
Yeah, I had the same experience. Actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with someone that I hosted on my podcast, and she was talking. She uses a competing product who is not yet able to do Microsoft 365. And after the podcast was over, I was like, "Well, hey, we can do Microsoft 365." And she said the same thing. She said, "Yes, that's good. Unfortunately, she hasn't yet convinced the rest of her company." Right? There are people who have bought off on the idea that one of the things that happens when you go to SaaS is you don't have to worry about backup anymore. Sadly, that idea sometimes comes from technical account managers. It comes from some experts on the web. And, I'll just quote, I think the best quote that sums all that up is, you can't believe everything you read on the internet. That's what Abraham Lincoln said.
Did he? Wow, that was foresight.
Yeah.
But how before we leave this topic, I just think, some of the breaches that we've seen of some of the SaaS applications, what do you recommend, Curtis, to people like in that woman that you talked to in her position where she's like, I haven't been able yet to convince them of why this is essential? What are like the three things that you would say, duh, no duh, and no duh, duh? You need to be doing these three things.
Well, the first thing I would do is I just tell them to go look at their service agreement, right? Go look at your service agreement, look for the words backup, restore, recovery, anything like that, and you won't find it. What you will find is you will find an SLA around availability. And a lot of people misinterpret availability to mean availability of their data. It's just availability of the platform. Make sure you just look at your service agreement because it will settle the argument for you. And then I would say, take a look at the platform that you're using. Pick which Microsoft 365, Salesforce, G Suite have all had incidents where a user made a mistake or got attacked, and all their data was erased, and then they called the vendor, and the vendor said, we don't have any backups. Who told you we had backups? So find that story and show that story and your service agreement to management. And if that doesn't help, I don't know what to tell you.
Call us and we'll say the same thing, but it'll sound
Same thing.
And I say that a little bit in jest, but not entirely, right? I mean, this is an area where if you're having trouble convincing, bringing in people who are considered outside experts can be of value, right? And so don't hesitate to look to something like that inside an organization, because again, if you've run into the wall 7 times and you've done all the things Curtis said, it never hurts, right? To just say, hey, sit down, listen, and these are people who see a lot more of the industry than I see as one individual, and it can carry some weight. Not always, but again, it's another pack.
Let me add one other thing on top of that. Sorry. We had Vanessa Tovez, she's a new Druva employee who's a Microsoft 365 expert, who's actually, fired 365 in anger out there in the real world. And we did a podcast with Stephen and I and her. And if you Google Druva no hardware required, you should find our podcast. And there's an episode that says things that you can't restore in Microsoft 365 without an external backup. So even the features that Microsoft does provide, which aren't backup, there are things that you can't restore which I hate using that word, but I don't know what else to use, without a third-party external backup. And I think that's another resource that could be very helpful.
All right, guys, let's move on to our third subject today. And this one, I cannot wait for both of you to dig in the next 5 minutes or so. Overrated trends. Curtis, from your lens, what are they?
I'll just say I'm going to put Kubernetes on there, and people that are watching are like, "Well, I can't believe he said Kubernetes was overrated." And Stephen is responsible for our Kubernetes response. All I'm saying is that the entire world is not moving to Kubernetes tomorrow, right? If you're the one company that doesn't yet have Kubernetes in your environment, guess what? You're not the only company, and you're not missing out on anything. If you have a, if you have a need for Kubernetes, learn what Kubernetes is, learn what it does, learn what it's really good at. And if you have an internal application that might benefit from Kubernetes, then use it. Don't feel like, oh, my company has missed out on the technological revolution of the century because you don't yet have it. Don't have a Kubernetes program just to have a Kubernetes program, right? Have it if you have a need for it.
And Stephen, I saw you almost have a little heart attack there.
Yeah, I know. I'm with Curtis 100%. I love Kubernetes. I've spent a lot of my last 3 years of my life on Kubernetes. It is fantastic technology, but again, it's, find the problem and then apply the right technology, as always. It always reminds me, short story, of way back when I was at NetApp. I remember meeting a telco, and they said, well, we need to buy about 200 petabytes of NetApp storage. And the sales rep was like, this is the greatest day of my life. And I foolishly asked, I'm like, well, why do you need to do that? And like, what workload? And the CIO said, well, we looked at industry standards, and industry standards say that about 20% of our storage should be NAS. So that would be about 20% of our storage. We have no idea what we're going to do with it. Don't do that, right? If you need it, use it. If you don't need it, don't do something crazy.
Right. And Stephen, let's moving off of Kubernetes, I want to get your take on what you think is an overrated trend right now.
Yeah, I think similar to Curtis, preface with, I'm not saying this isn't useful. I'm not saying it isn't important. I'm not saying it isn't growing, but I think the AI ML, right? I mean, every startup you see is an AI ML startup, even if, they do grocery deliveries. Oh, we're AI ML grocery delivery. Again, I think it's a trend that's going to continue to change our world, but don't go hunting for AI ML problems. At least in my perspective, some of the challenges that people have as they try to roll out advanced AI ML is they don't have good data yet. If you can't do basic analytics, AI ML is not going to take bad data and suddenly make it good data. So you need to be able to get good data, do basic analytics, start to build up expertise inside your organization, and then look for the problems that regular analytics can't solve. And that's usually a good case to say, okay, we need something more advanced like AI ML. So A to B to C. So great trend. But again, like Curtis said, don't adopt AI ML just because you think you need to.
My presence here today on this video call is actually a deep fake video driven by AI. So I disagree with Stephen. No,
they've got the Curtis, you guys.
Yeah, it just in general, I'm always against this idea of we need to have something just because it's new and hot, right? And an AI and ML solves a lot of problems. We use it internally. We use it in the product, right? We do ransomware detection using machine learning, and we're like, hey, our product will automatically notice that something has happened. That was a problem, right? Here's a problem. How can we solve this problem? And we said, well, perhaps we could apply ML to it. And we did. And poof, we can now detect ransomware. That's an example of what you do with this technology. Don't have a meeting where you say, hey, where can we use AI ML, right? Wait for a problem that solution can solve. It's the same as I said about Kubernetes, which, it's the same as Stephen said.
And I think this year more than any other, it's really important not to get, because like we said, so much of 2020 people were on hold. So much of this year, you've just got to get the basics up and running again, and you've got to, finish that backlog of things that you sort of put on hold in 2020. So this is, of any year, this is the year to say, I'm probably not going to go esoteric. I'm probably not going to try to go bleeding edge. This is the year where you look for technology that works to solve problems you've got, to set yourself up for the next year. But just do projects this year that are going to make a difference, that are going to matter.
That's great advice, guys. Kind of wrapping things up, looking at the trends that are overrated, great technologies, but really kind of be going back to the basics, as Stephen, as you just said, because ransomware as a service is on the rise, app sprawl, and there is a big need to protect those SaaS applications and their data. Guys, I wish we had more time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you both. We didn't need the magic 8 ball, so I guess I'll save this for something else later today. Or
honestly, it's as good as our predictions. Whatever that.
Curtis, can I say what does Curtis think about the iPhone prediction he made 10 years ago? Guys, thank you so much for joining me on Series 2, Episode 1 of In Cloud We Trust. For W. Curtis Preston and Stephen Manley, I'm Lisa Martin, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.